I think we're almost there, brothers and sisters. Let me just pull the presentation up for today. I used the same slide because, well, I'll tell you because in just a minute. Let me finish. All right, because the verse, Revelation 13:15, we used it last time, but I'm going to read it again. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And we're going to refer to Daniel. Hopefully we'll get there during this morning because he faced a death decree also, but God preserved him. The three worthies also, and God preserved them. And we want to be like Daniel. Remember, dare to be like Daniel. And we may not be in a lion's den as he was, but there will be crises coming into our lives that will be just as significant. Now, and here's the opening text for our lesson, Daniel 6:5, which states, and these were his enemies speaking, we shall not find any occasion against this Daniel, except we find it against him concerning the law of his God. And that will be true for us. And it's been true for since God made man and Adam and Eve sinned. It's been true that those who are faithful to God, Satan's attacks will come upon them, and especially through our belief and stand for and living in us this law of God. Now, to review, we went over Romans 13:1-7 last time, and this is the text that starts off, let every soul be subject unto the higher powers. And we've applied these verses to our situation today. I won't read them for sake of time. I'm just reviewing. Another text that was important to us in our study last time was Matthew 22:21, render unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. And this affects us today and in the immediate future, because this argument may be applied to us. Well, we are to render unto Caesar, and Caesar has made these laws about how we look at Saturday, the Sabbath, and how we look at Sunday, and we are to render whatever the laws are. Now, A.T. Jones faced this in 1888, if I'm not mistaken. The date will come up soon. And he went to a Senate committee and spoke eloquently against the Blair Law that was before the committee for passage, which affected secular work on the Sabbath. Now, for everyone. And I think things are not moving correctly. Yes, we missed this slide. This is Blair, Senator Blair. And in the 50th Congress, yes, 1888, he introduced a Sunday bill. Not a worship bill, but a Sunday bill that was to limit what could be done on Sunday. And A.T. Jones asked to present to this committee, and they allowed him to come. They gave him an hour, and he said in his little pamphlet of this, the National Sunday Law, that he was interrupted so many times by people, especially Senator Blair, asking him questions. He really didn't get an hour to present anything, so they gave him an extra 10 minutes when the questions were over. But nevertheless, he says in here, a national Sunday law, in his pamphlet, The National Sunday Law. A national Sunday law is a question of national interest, ... The subject is worthy of the careful attention of the whole American people. And this applies to us too. The principles of the American Constitution, the proper relationship between religion and the state, the distinction between moral and civil law, the inalienable civil and religious rights of men, i.e., the Constitution, these are questions that never should become secondary in the mind of any American citizen. And the reason is because it all will lead to the papacy and the resurgence of the papacy, and that comes up later on. But part of the Blair Law that was introduced into Congress stated that this is a bill to secure to the people, in other words, to control the people, but they worded it to secure to the people the enjoyment of the first day of the week, commonly known as the Lord's Day, as a day of rest, and to promote its observance, etc. And then it goes on to say, no person, corporation, agent, servant, employee, anything, shall perform any secular work. I'm paraphrasing here because we've gone over this in the past. And no person shall engage in any play, game, amusement, recreation. And they qualify it to the disturbance of others. And they qualified secular work also, except for those works of necessity. It also applied to the mail. No mail delivery, no mail work. Now, Jones, and I see this is page 11.1, and I'm just going to go back because I think there's a typo here on slide 6 where I said it's page 111.2. I think it's a typo. It should be 11.2, and I'm telling you that, and I'll fix it on my slides, but it couldn't be 111 because this was part of his introduction. I saw that before, but I couldn't correct it until I see here that we're quoting page 11. So he states, the principle upon which we stand, he's talking to the Senate committee, is that civil government is civil and has nothing to do with, in the matter of legislation, with religious observances in any way. And he goes on to say it's based on Matthew 22:21, which we have already read. This is a review, and I'm going to quickly go through some of these review slides to get to our meat today. But to reiterate, our duties, Jones stated, under civil government pertain solely to the government and to our fellow man, because the powers of civil government pertain to men and their relations to one another and to the government, and i.e. not to religious affairs. So Senator Blair states, you oppose all Sunday laws? Yes, sir. You're against all, he says it again, all Sunday laws? Yes, sir. We are against every Sunday law. And going on, we would be equally against a Sabbath law if it were proposed. And Blair clarifies again, state and national laws alike, state and national, he says. And then he quoted George Washington, who said, every man who conducts himself as a good citizen is accountable alone to God for his religious faith and is to be protected in worshiping God. That's a review. We talked about it last time. Mormonism was brought up, and polygamy, and I'm going to skip through that. Then he also, because we went over it last time, and also he stated another argument was if you lived in a community where property was shared, but if they took your property against your will, then the civil law could intervene because the civil law is to protect our rights against thievery, for example. And so you could voluntarily share your property, but if it's taken from you by this community you're in involuntarily, then that is when the civil government can intervene. And he used another example of worshiping an idol. Anyone has a right to worship however they want, be it an idol, be it on one day or another. But if your worship involves the rights of others, like human sacrifice, which we know has occurred over the millennia, then that's when civil government can step in, because this is a civil affair. So he used that example. And this particular page 16, middle question, I repeat, the question of religion is not to be considered by the state. The sole question is, did he threaten the life of his fellow man? Civil government must protect citizens. And this is the divide he's trying to make sure is clear in every member's mind of this Senate committee, so that they will have intelligence about whether to pass this Blair bill on. And the last sentence of this particular slide, and I can't take time to read it because we have to finish up today, and there's some thoughts and concerns that I haven't shared yet. And so I just reiterating in your mind that one of the arguments, he argues in different areas, but in this particular argument that he's making between religious government and civil government, that they're not to cross lines. The sole question must ever be, is the action civil or uncivil, i.e. religious? Now, here's an area that we haven't talked about before, the concept of the good of men. Senator Blair now, I'm skipping several pages, but we now get to the point in his pamphlet that Senator Blair brings up this concept of the good of men. And we've seen it in our day and age just recently. For example, well, let me just explain how we usually think of this, or sometimes it's called the higher good, is that which is shared and beneficial. That is, the higher good is that good which is shared and beneficial for all or most members of a given community. An example might be of an art collector donating their collections to a public museum so all could enjoy the artwork rather than just the privileged few who see it in private. And so that's thinking of the good of others. And if you have a nice collection, I saw someone's collection this week of arrowheads, Native American arrowheads, spearheads, and where I live, these Native Americans prior to my coming here lived. And it was a beautiful collection, a collection that touched me of many things that this person has found in the ground as they've been constructing and doing things that unearthed them. And so this was a collection that he had and he shared. He's sharing it so others can enjoy it also. And that's thinking of the good of others. However, this has been applied during COVID-19 with the idea like, if you don't get the vaccination and you become sick and you share that virus with someone else in the store or someone in the family, and that person gets sick and might even die, how can you do that? You must think of the good of others and become vaccinated, even if you don't want to. You see, that's one of the arguments that has been presented in our day and age. But back then, Senator Blair brought it up again. He said, now apply that right. And the right he's talking about is, I have to go back and find it, but this right came up. He said, apply it to the institution of the Sabbath among men. And when he says Sabbath, he means Sunday. The institution of the Sabbath among men for the good of men. In other words, we're doing this, Mr. Jones. not because we're trying to control people, but for the good of them. They need a day off. They need to have a family day. They need to have a day when they focus on God. See, the purpose of it was not just to stop work, but so that you can go to church, you see. And Jones brings that out. And so now Blair is bringing in this argument that we're doing this law that we want to be passed, this supposed law, it didn't become law, that we want to be passed is really for the good of men. So let's go on. Jones says, very good, we will consider that. Here are persons who are keeping Sunday. And I'm going to read the whole thing because we haven't read it before. It is their right to work on every other day of the week. It is their right to work on that day if they desire, but they are keeping that day, recognizing it as the Sabbath. Now, while they are doing that, which is their right, here are other people keeping Saturday, and others who are keeping Friday. The Mohammedans recognize Friday, but we will confine ourselves to those who keep Saturday, the seventh day of the Sabbath, as the Sabbath. Those who keep Sunday and who want legislation for that day ask that other people shall be forbidden to work on Sunday because they say it disturbs their rest. And that has been brought up in pages that I haven't quoted here. So you should read the whole thing. It's really valid and important. But anyway, he said, he's reiterating that they want Sunday legislated because those who work on Sunday are disturbing them and their worship. And they claim that they have a right to be properly protected, and they're not being properly protected. Are you following? So Jones is asking, do they really believe in principle? You know, they're saying this, but do they believe it as a principle? Let's see, he says. They will never admit, that their work on Saturday disturbs the rest or the worship of the man. No, that's not right. Yeah, that's right. That their work on Saturday, when the Sunday keepers work on Saturday, the Sunday keepers will never admit that their work is disturbing the Sabbath keepers on Saturday or their worship. But they want it to go their way, but they want the protection and the rest and worship not to be disturbed by someone who maybe lives next door and is doing some work on that day. So they want protection, but they don't want to give it to the Saturday keeper the same rights going on. If their work on Saturday does not disturb the Sabbath rest, or the worship of the man who keeps Saturday, Jones speaking here, then upon what principle is it that our work on Sunday disturbs the rest of those who keep Sunday? If their work does not disturb our rest and our worship, our work cannot, on principle, he's saying, it's a logical principle. Let me read it again. If their work does not disturb our rest and our worship, our work cannot disturb their rest or their worship. More than this, and then he gives an example of someone he overheard at a Sunday convention in San Francisco at which he was present. He says there was a person who spoke on this very question and said, there are some people, and a good many of them in this state, who do not believe in Sunday laws and who keep Saturday as the Sabbath. But, said he, the majority must rule. The vast majority of the people do keep Sunday. Their rights must be respected, and they have a right to enact it into law, end quote. I arose, Jones says, I arose and said, suppose the Seventh-day people were in the majority, and they should go to the legislature and ask for a law to compel you to keep Saturday out of respect to their rights. Would you consider it right? There was a murmur all over the house, no. And so what Jones is bringing up is this is what they want, but it's not based on principle, because if it were based on principle, it would go both ways, is what he's saying. But going on. Blair then asked, on what grounds did they say no? And Jones says, that is what I would like to know. They are not logical. Their answer shows that there is no ground in justice nor in right for their claim that the majority should rule in matters of conscience. Senator Blair, that doesn't follow. At least it doesn't strike me that it follows. He's saying that Jones's conclusion that there's no ground in justice or in right for their claim that the majority should rule. And Blair says, I don't agree with that. And then he says, Blair says the majority has a right to rule in what pertains to the regulation of society. And if Caesar regulates society, then the majority has a right in this country to say what we shall render to Caesar. Now, I'm bringing this up to you because you may face this argument. You may face the argument of the greater good, as many people were faced when they declined vaccination of COVID-19. And the argument was used, but you have to think about others. You can't be spreading this and causing others to become sick and maybe even die. You need to think of others, the higher good. And Blair is saying, if the majority says Sunday should be a day of rest, no work, etc., that's the majority, then that is what rules. And you may be faced with this, and how are you going to answer it? How are you going to know what is right? And Jones is saying civil legislation has no right to make legislation on religious affairs. They take care of the things of the state, no murder, no thievery, those kinds of things, no human trafficking, those kinds of things, but not about how we worship. And so Jones answers, very good, but the majority has no right to say what we shall render to God, nor, and those are his emphases here, nor has it any right to say that we should render to Caesar that which is God's. If 999 out of every 1,000 people in the United States kept the seventh day, that is Saturday, and I deemed it my right and my choice to keep Sunday, they would have not right to compel me to rest on Saturday. The majority doesn't rule in affairs of faith. Blair says, in other words, you take the ground that for the good of society, irrespective of the religious aspect of the question, society may not require abstinence from labor on Sabbath if it disturbs others. As to its disturbing others, Jones says, I have proved it doesn't. The body of your question states my position exactly, and to look back, the body is society may not require abstinence from labor on Sabbath, and that is my position exactly. But then someone brought up, what about blasphemy? At that time, states had different rules that blasphemy against God was not allowed. They had rules against it. And so that was a common thing going on the state level. Not every state, but many states. Pennsylvania, I forget the other states, Massachusetts was another one. They had laws on the books against blasphemy, and blasphemy is only in relationship to God. Senator Blair says, this question was passed to me. Is the Speaker also opposed to all laws against blasphemy? And Jones right away said, yes, sir. But not because blasphemy is not wrong, but because civil government cannot define blasphemy nor punish it. Blasphemy pertains to God and is an offense against him. Blair, suppose it be hurtful to society. A belief in the existence of God and reverence for the Creator and a cultivation of that sentiment in society is for the good of society. We go back to the higher good. It's for the good of society to believe in the existence of God and to reverence Him as the Creator. And we believe in that. And we are, and then Blair says, this belief in the existence of God and the cultivation of that sentiment in society is the basis of all law and restraint. If the Almighty, who knows everything, and Blair, as we go on, we might come to the conclusion Blair is a Christian. He's written this piece of legislature, and he says, God knows everything, or at least as far as we know, he's saying, and it's difficult to see how we can restrain each other if God has no right to restrain. And then Jones says he has the right, and he does restrain us. And then Blair brings in, well, we've got to do this for our children, because if we don't legislate a belief in God, and the parents, he doesn't say this, we do it for our children, that they will grow up knowing there is a God and that we are to respect Him and to worship Him, i.e. on Sunday. And I'm going to pass over some of these quotations that I have here, references I hear. Jones says, we forbid the theft. Oh, here, let me read it. Senator Palmer now speaks up. There is an infection in blasphemy or in covetousness. For example, or instance, if one covetous man in a neighborhood should infuse the whole neighborhood with covetousness to such an extent that all would become thieves, then covetousness would be a proper subject of legislation. We stop there because that's why we have laws against blasphemy, because it's becoming so prevalent. And so we've legislated against it. And if such a thing came against, I should say, concerning covetousness, it would be a proper subject of legislation. Jones says right away, never. You forbid the theft, but not the covetousness. You cannot invade the condition of the mind in which lies the covetousness. You can prosecute the theft, but you cannot, he's saying, prosecute what's going on in the mind. And that's a place where our religious faith exists. But Blair brings up, we do not say you must invade the condition of the mind. But society has a right to make regulations going on. Society, by a major vote, establishes regulations, and we have to obey what is settled by the majority. And brothers and sisters, you might think, well, why is she going through all this? Because when we come to the enforcement of the Sunday law, which will take place and which will be enforced or tried to be enforced by the death decree, it's going to be based on the fact that the majority has spoken, and it's going to be based on the fact that it's for the good, the higher good of everyone. And remember, at that time, this world will be in chaos. The winds of strife will have been let loose. Satan will bring every kind of destruction, misery, whatever, on this world. And people are going to say we're at fault because we are not worshiping God. like you should be worshiping. You need to stop this Saturday foolishness and focus just like the rest of us on Sunday. And once you do this, just as once Jonah was tossed overboard and the sea calmed, once you do this, we will have calm and God can bless us. Do you understand this? And this is what was being argued in 1888 by Jones before the Senate committee. Not just this, but the argument about the Constitution and the Establishment Clause. And if we have time, we'll get to that also. But Jones is making very clear to these men what law, civil law, is to be, how it is to be applied. It is to be applied against overt acts like trafficking, as I mentioned, of people, or against theft, or against murder. These kinds of things the civil government has a right to make laws about, but never about things of the mind. And that's where our religious faith is centered, our beliefs. And you cannot legislate what you believe or legislate what you do as an overt action based on your faith. That's what Jones is trying to make clear to these people, these intelligent people. Blair was an intelligent man. He could see what was happening as they dialogued, and he brought in other arguments like the higher good and the majority rule. And, as I was studying all this and trying to understand, and my time was limited, I have to say. I haven't read the whole pamphlet, and I intend to do that one day very soon. But you can read it too. And maybe you have, maybe more than once. Maybe it has already impacted on your determination to be like Daniel, regardless of the laws that were passed, foolishly passed by Darius. And we will have laws passed against us. But Blair finds that really hard to believe. Let me see. We're at 10:30ish. And the next slide, 27, declares Jones brings in the First Amendment to the Constitution about Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And so he's saying, Senator Blair, your law is unconstitutional. It's making laws against religion or prohibiting our exercise of our religion. And remember, the fourth commandment says, 6 days shalt thou labor, but the seventh day is the Sabbath. But so they are prohibiting you to do labor on one of the 6 days that God has commanded labor to be done. And so he's saying it's, besides all the things I've already told you, it's about what civil government is to cover, and it's not to legislate on religious affairs. Besides all these, it's not constitutional. Let's see what slide 28 says. Just again, civil government has nothing to do with religious things. This bill, i.e. the Blair bill, is wholly religious. And now we get to a point that he hasn't brought up before. So let me read this. Mr. Jones states, this is the record, that is the point I am making here, that if you allow this legislation, you lead to the establishment of a new theocracy, and he's already gone through theocracy, after the model of the papacy. First time that I'm aware he's now bringing in his objection to Blair's law because it has tentacles, so to speak, to the papacy. He says, new theocracy after the model of the papacy and civil government has nothing to do with religious things. This bill is wholly religious, and if you begin this course of religious legislation, you will end only in a theocracy, a man-made theocracy, and that will be the papacy repeated. And then it goes on. Blair now responds to this idea, and he says, we have had the Sunday laws in this country for 300 years, i.e. the blue laws that I've mentioned before. They have constantly become more and more liberalized. Have you ever known, and he's saying that instead of become narrow-minded like the papacy, they're more and more liberalized. And then he asks, Jones, have you ever known an instance, though the sentiment in favor of the Sabbath seems to be growing constantly stronger, but he's saying, have you ever known an instance where any state in this union undertook to enact a law that anybody should go to church, which is the danger you seem to apprehend? In other words, our law is just restricting labor. It has nothing to do with saying you have to go to church. Jones says, not yet. They are now after the first law. This will lead to that. Earlier, Jones had said these secular laws that you have written into your Blair Act about restricting secular stuff, restricting recreation on Sunday. Blair is saying, that's one thing, but worshiping on a law for worship, it's never been, and it never will be. But Jones says, your law, he has said in the past, has implied no work, family time, no game time. It's implied that as a family, this is when you worship. But there's no law, Jones says, not yet. And then Blair says, have you ever heard of a propositions being made in any legislative body to compel anyone to attend church on Sunday? Jones, the propositions that are made are for that very purpose. The propositions he's making, i.e., Blair is making. The propositions that are made are for that very purpose, to stop the Sunday trains, the Sunday newspapers, in short, to stop all work on Sunday so that people can go to church. Blair, but these people come here and say they don't have that purpose. There's no such purpose. They've been doing these things in the States for 100 years, and during the colonial period anterior to that time. Have you ever heard of on the American continent, within the territory of what is now the United States, a proposition or suggestion in a legislative body to compel anyone to attend church? Not in the legislative body, but in the ecclesiastical bodies. Blair says ecclesiastical bodies do not make the laws. Congress is not an ecclesiastical body, Jones, but it is an ecclesiastical body that is seeking to secure and enforce this law. So what Jones is saying, even though you say this is just to stop Sunday, it's not to worship on Sunday, stop Sunday labor, it's not to worship on Sunday, and it never will be. Even the people who are promoting this law are saying the same thing. But Jones says it's an ecclesiastical, i.e., a church body that is seeking to secure this and enforce this law going on. And so they go on. I just add all of this to show that God used Jones. And I've thought this week as I've been studying this, that we have much to thank Jones for, because this law, the Blair Law, it wasn't law, but it was sought to be law, was not passed. This legislation was not passed, and it never, he sought to bring it up again in the next congressional session, and nothing of the sort passed. And I can only say that it had to have been on what Jones presented, not just to Blair at that Senate committee hearing, but to the people who were listening. And remember, I showed you a picture of the Senate room 20 years earlier, where there are many people in the balconies listening in. Maybe these people were listening also. But regardless of how it came about, God used Jones to give us time, to delay any national legislature about restricting Sunday labor, which was a precursor, or is a precursor, to Sunday worship, legislation for Sunday worship. And this is where it all fits in, brothers and sisters, with us about the seal of God or the mark of the beast. We know the mark of the beast is accepting Sunday as God's day of worship and worshiping on that day. We know all about the three angels' messages and the fourth angel and the seal of God. And that's a seal we all want. And brothers and sisters, let me see if I can find it. Well, let's just read a little bit from Great Controversy, 588. The Protestants of the United States will be foremost in stretching their hands across the gulf to grasp the hand of spiritualism. They will reach over the abyss to clasp hands with the Roman power, and under the influence of this threefold union, this country will follow in the steps of Rome in trampling on the rights of conscience. Jones knew this. 5T 451, by the decree enforcing the institution of the papacy in violation of the law of God, our nation will disconnect herself fully from righteousness. When Protestantism shall stretch her hand across the gulf to grasp the hand of the Roman power, when she will reach across the abyss, she's wording it differently, to clasp hands with spiritualism, when under the influence of this threefold union, our country shall repudiate every principle of its constitution, and the time has come for the marvelous working of Satan. I'm paraphrasing there. 5T again, 451. As the approach of the Roman armies was assigned to the disciples of the impending destruction of Jerusalem, so may this apostasy be assigned to us, that the limit of God's forbearance is reached, that the measure of our nation's iniquity is full, and that the angel of mercy is about to take her flight, never to return. The people of God will then be plunged into Jacob's time of trouble. The Lord is doing his work. All heaven is astir. Again, 5T 451. The judge of all the earth is soon to arise and vindicate his insulted authority. The mark of deliverance, i.e., the seal of God, will be set upon the men who keep God's commandments, who revere his law, and who refuse the mark of the beast or of his image. Going on, 5T, God has revealed what is to take place in the last days, that his people may be prepared to stand against the tempest. We need to be ready. And I'm just going to, it's an important reference, but this is our last chance. I'm going to move on. 5T. The Sunday movement is now making its way in darkness. The leaders are concealing the true issue, and many who unite in the movement do not themselves see what's going on. My words here. Let's move on. And I refer back to A.T. Jones in a different place. The American Sentinel, on December 13, 1894, page 386.12, the decree of Nebuchadnezzar calling upon Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to fall down and worship the golden image on the day of its dedication did not prohibit these three Hebrews from worshiping Jehovah on the seventh day. I know I've read this before, but this is an important concept to understand. This decree of Nebuchadnezzar to fall down and worship didn't stop them from worshiping on the Sabbath day. Just do this, fall down and worship here. But they refused to bow down. Even though legislation by Nebuchadnezzar had not been made against worshiping on Sabbath, they refused to bow down. And the judge of all the earth sanctioned their refusal and rewarded their anarchy with a marvelous deliverance from the fiery furnace. So, just a thought about how you might approach any blue laws, any Sunday labor laws or non-labor laws to come our way. And I expect it to come our way as a precursor to the worship law. Sunday worship law. The Hebrews didn't bow down to anything. A time is coming when the law of God is in a special sense to be made void in our land. The rulers of our nation will by legislative enactments enforce Sunday law, and thus God's people will be brought into great peril. I'm going to go on. But the closing thought is national apostasy will be followed by national ruin. We see the effects are being made to restrict our religious liberties. The Sunday question is now assuming large proportion. This is Review and Herald, December 18, 1888, paragraph 12. In the part that I want to focus on, she says, if God has ever spoken by me, and we know God has. If God has ever spoken by me, the time will come when we shall, or i.e. will, be brought before councils and before thousands for his name's sake. And each one, she doesn't say some of us will, she says we will. And each one will have to give the reason of his faith. Then will come the severest criticism upon every position that has been taken for the truth. Jones was before the Senate committee. Blair and another senator criticized and brought up other things, but here and there, and higher good and majority rules, etc. And Jones answered it. We will face maybe like criticisms or worse criticisms. We've just read a little while before that God has told us about what's coming so we can prepare. Obedience to the law of God will give protection from his wrath. Search the scriptures. That is what that reference is all about. Let me make sure I haven't doubled my... No, okay. We're in a stupor, and we must be raised from our stupor. I'm moving on. Oh, it's 10:47. I'm going to skip and refer you to the fact that it is in a crisis that our character is revealed. And only those, and this is how we prepare. I can't elaborate on it, but she says, God will have his people prepared for the soon coming crisis. Prepared or unprepared, we must all meet it. Only those whose characters are thoroughly disciplined to meet the divine standard will be able to stand firm in that testing time. And keep that in mind. It's perfection of character that will get us through that time, brothers and sisters. These are good quotes. I can't read them, lack of time, but I want to get to the closing thoughts. Okay, we are to Luke 21:36. Watch ye therefore and pray always. Oh, that reminds me, we have a 3 o'clock Revelation study and a prayer time together. Please all come. We are to watch and study and pray. Let's do this as a group. And I want to tell you, at 2 o'clock, the hour before our 3 o'clock study, we're going to start reading Haskell's book about the Seer of Patmos. In our study time on Monday, story time on Monday, we've been reading about Haskell, and now we're going to apply Haskell's book as a precursor to our study on Revelation. So if you can join us at 2, we're going to start that book, Seer of Patmos, and I hope you can come. And if anyone needs a copy of the book, we can get that to you. So that's at 2, and then be sure to be with us at 3 if you can. I'm not pushing it in the sense that for me, but for I can't say for the good of others, because it's for your own blessing, but by sharing with one another, we do strengthen one another. So we are to pray always that we will be accounted worthy. I have more text, but we have to close. I don't have a choice. Let's pray. Father, please speak to our hearts. In the absence of what I could share, you can do this, and we need you to do this, Father. Please bring truths to our mind. Help us to understand, to study, to watch, and to pray, and to go to you for the power to perfect our characters. Only you know our hearts. We're ignorant of much that goes on. Please help us, Father. We need help. Be with each one who's listening, all of our families, our loved ones. Please be especially with Vince's daughter, Jaden. Bless her, Lord. Help her with whatever her need is. You love our children, Father. We've done the best that we knew to do to train them in the ways of the Lord. Please, please, Father, help. We can't be in their lives totally now like we were when they were young, but you can. So please, Father, speak to Jaden's heart. Speak to our hearts and all of our loved ones, because time is short. In Jesus' name, amen. And I have to close for now, brothers and sisters. I'm glad that you were with us. I'm going to close out. Let me just check here. Okay. Bye for now, and God bless.